itself, but we're going to be focusing on form responses. So I hope that you've completed this form. If you haven't yet, I'm going to include the link in the chat quickly so that you get to complete this form as I'm explaining the form itself. This is simply so that we've got some dummy information to work with in this session. But what we've seen at the moment, or what we're seeing more and more of, is people are collecting a lot of information using Google Forms because they found Google Forms to be pretty straightforward and easy to use. But we don't always know what we do with that information afterwards. We're not 100% sure what we can do. Yes, we have this tab over here that is called the responses. So I can click on responses. I've got 25 people who responded to this, and this will generate some form of feedback for me. So this might be enough for what I need, but it is not always that easy to use. I mean, the simple example is this last question. If I were to send this out to teachers or to parents, at least, would you like to make an appointment with a teacher? I can see that, okay, so there are 13 people who don't want to make an appointment, but there are 11 that do. And who are they? Because this doesn't really tell me that. Now I can go to this over here if I'm in the responses, and I can go to individuals, and in this way I can go one by one. I can actually go and track them one by one, but this really is a clumsy way of doing it, to be completely honest. So we want to look at how do we go about looking at our responses in Google Sheets and manipulating that information in a way that makes sense to us, that becomes usable. Before we do that, however, we are going to spend just about 10 minutes or so, maybe even less, on the Google form itself. Just a couple of things that you need to keep in mind, pitfalls and things that you could avoid that makes your life easier. I think my colleague said a very valuable thing today when he mentioned that the minute that you start understanding that a Google form writes to a Google Sheet, actually, a spreadsheet, you start thinking differently about the type of questions you're going to ask, because you start realizing which types of questions make it a little bit more tricky to deal with the data. So if we just go to our questions simply here, and please, I want to highlight this, and I really hope everyone saw the giant big warning sign that I did not expect you to enter real information, because we are going to make this publicly visible to the entire world in a minute or two. Not that anything really ties anyone to anyone, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But let's have a look at the questions. So I've got a couple of questions. I've got my learner's name. I've got my learner's surname. Now this needs to be typed in. There are different ways of collecting it, drop downs, but it becomes very difficult to do that. Then if we look over here, I've got learners, gender, and grade. These are two different types of questions. But just note that while I've used this one that you see over here is called a multiple choice question, where they pick the one or the other one, and this one is called a drop down, they do exactly the same thing. But just a little tip, what I found, a good practice, once you get to more than 4 options, 5 maybe is a max, you should really start using drop downs rather than multiple choice. Otherwise your forms are just difficult to navigate and they're very long and etc. And the nice thing about a drop down is someone can actually type the answer in and it'll take them to that answer. So if it's a long list, use a drop down. It's much easier. And remember, you can copy and paste things into that. We have workshops on Google Forms that you'll be able to access on our site as well if you want more information on how forms actually work. Here we've got a question on the section. Here I've got a drop down for your son, daughter's favorite teacher. And here I've got an interesting one, because I always tell people, as far as possible, avoid the boxes, right? Because these boxes become tricky to deal with. However, just because the reason why I say avoid the boxes, radial ones are you can only select one. With the minute that we use boxes, people can select multiple ones. So if I were, for example, to change this and say this is supposed to be a checkbox, I can't have this be a checkbox, because the learners can't be in more than one class. They have to pick one. They can't pick multiple ones. And the minute that they do this, that they actually end up picking multiple ones, it's going to throw all of my information. It's just going to make the whole thing difficult. So that's a key thing that you need to make sure of beforehand, is to change these to the correct type of question. But when I get to this kind of question, which activities does your son, daughter participate in? I can't have only one, because when they open this up, they're going to look at it and they're going to say, well, my son, for example, does athletics, and he does cricket, and he does hockey, and he does rugby, and he's in the choir, and he's chess. He's a really eager beaver. He does everything that he can do. So just be careful that in this instance, you have to use the checkbox. And we're going to look at how you actually deal with those checkboxes as well, because from the responses, it becomes a mess when you're dealing with those checkboxes. If we're just going to use the Google form responses, that's why the sheet becomes useful. And then the last question, would you like to make an appointment with a teacher? Now, there's something that I deliberately did wrong, which Google Forms has actually changed in recent times. But I deliberately made all of these questions option, you don't have to complete them if you don't want to, right? So they're not compulsory questions, which for a form like this one that I'm going to send out doesn't really make sense, except maybe for this one where the person might not participate in anything. Or you can, I suppose, arguably leave this one out if you think it's a personal question, you don't want to answer it. But it's not a good idea to just leave all your questions as optional, because you're going to end up getting information that you're going to struggle to deal with. Right, so what we talked about responses, I'm not going to go into the responses here because we're interested in what we can do in Google Sheets, not what we can do in Google Forms specifically today. The one thing that I do want to point out, if you have worked in Forms before, Forms has changed a little bit in terms of the settings is now very different than it used to be. Just make sure when you set up your Google form that you use especially this part when we look at the responses, that this part has been set up correctly. It's something that I've done it a million times, and I keep on, and I'm sure I'm going to make the mistake a million times more. But in our instance, because we are working on a Google Workspace, the default setting is this restrict users to the Western Cape Education Department and its trusted organizations. This one is usually on by default for in our organization. And if you're working on a Google Workspace, the same thing will apply. But if I'm going to send this to people outside of my organization, it has to be, we can't have that one on. And then also remember, the minute that you say collect email addresses, it requires a person to have an email address and to log in. If you don't set this as on, anyone can complete the form, and they don't actually need to have, don't need to be able to log in. And then you'll see with form defaults here, there's a couple of things that you could set here. And I think this to me is an important one. Make questions required by default. Mine is set to on. I had to manually go and change all of those required options for this form just to illustrate what I wanted to say by that. But now when we go back to responses, I'm going to show you an important trick that I hope everyone has actually done. And if you haven't, this is going to change Google Forms for you dramatically. There's an option over here, the little green button, which is the icon for Google Sheets. And this allows me to create and link, or to link these responses. See, there's another one that just popped in. It allows me to create a spreadsheet based on these responses. Now, if I click on this option, we're not going to look at the second one, but I do want to point out that there are two options here. The default one says create a new spreadsheet. And here I can go and give my spreadsheet a name. So we're going to call this form response workshop, right? And then, but I've also got this option, which I'm not going to select now, but the option to select an existing spreadsheet. Now, this is very useful when you actually have multiple forms that are supposed to feed into the same form. If you're going to design a form that you want to send to, for example, grade 8 parents, a different one to grade 9 parents, a different one to grade 10 parents, but then they, instead of having to deal with 3 different files, you have all of them feed into one workbook. The same can apply to when you're using Google Quiz, which is a mode of Google Forms. So just on a side note, when people talk about use Google Quiz for something, Google Quiz is essentially just a Google form that you've flipped and turned into a Google Quiz. We've got workshops on that as well that you're welcome to go check out on our e-learning site. But those as well, you can feed them all into one central Google Sheet, which makes it a lot easier to deal with the responses and to manage the data. But for this one, we don't have one that we're going to feed into. So I'm going to create a new spreadsheet based on this information. Right, so we'll click create. I see there's one more person that's already entered a response again. And slowly but surely, we will get something that looks like this. Right, so here is our Google form responses. Now, from this point, you can start working with the data. You can start manipulating the data. You can do a number of different things with it. For today's exercise, however, what we are going to do, we want to focus on what you do when the data is static. What I mean by that is when we are done with collecting form responses. This is not the session where we look at how you deal with a live form. In other words, a form that is continually getting more and more and more information into. That's when we look at Masterclass 1, because it becomes a bit more complicated to deal with. So today's session is what happens when we've got the information and we're done and it's static and it is there. So what I do want to show you very quickly, when we are in Google Sheets, I hope you can all see this clearly. When we're in Google Sheets, from a Google Sheet, we can jump directly into a Google form, which is a trick that people sometimes miss. Now, I also want to point out to this, you'll see that little purple icon over there. That's the Google form icon. That means that this tab in the Google Sheet is accepting responses from a Google form. So from this point, I can actually go and, if I wanted to, unlink the form, which means that the form will stop adding information into this, which I don't want to do at this point. I want to show you, what I also want to show you is from this point, we can go from tools to the manage new form, and we can actually go to a Google form from directly out of our form response. You can also play around with creating a Google form that's going to automatically link to the sheet. We're not looking at that today, but let's see. From this point, we can go straight to our Google form as well. Now, what I actually want to do is I want to make sure that this information is going to be static. We've got 29 entries, so I think that's enough entries for us to work with. So we'll go to edit form, and I am now going to go to the point where I'll click on responses. And I'm going to say I'm done accepting responses, right? I don't want any more responses. So when someone goes to complete my Google form, they're just going to see this message. This form is no longer accepting responses. If you need to, you can just turn this on again, and then it'll just continue accepting responses. You can turn it off again when you need to turn it off. So if it's something that needs to happen once a term, you open it up for a week, get the responses, close it again. Open it up for a week, get the responses, close it again. Right, so now our form is closed. Let's go back to our Google Sheet. Here we've got our Google Sheet. It is completed. All the information that we want, it has been collected there. So the first thing that you need to know about a Google form and what it'll do for you automatically, you don't actually have to even do this next step, even though it's something that I think it's useful to understand how to do it. So I'm going to still explain how to do it. But what you'll see, the first row, those are the questions in your form, right? So they are exactly the same. You'll see every single time I ask the question, learner's name, learner's surname, learner's gender, those will become our Google form headers. If you change it, it's not a problem, but when your form becomes live again, it'll just simply change whatever you wrote there in the top back to what you see on the Google form. So I could change this to name, and it's not going to change anything on my Google on the sheet. But the minute someone adds a new response, it'll just change back to learner's name. So just keep that in mind. So it works well once this form is locked to change some of these headers. Now we also want to make these headers easier to work with. Or before we get to that, just to show you what this freezing of the pane is that I'm referring to. I'm just going to make my cursor a little bit bigger, then you can see where I'm going, and I'm going to open up the floor for questions in a minute. I just want to finish this first little bit now. When we want to freeze our pane, all that we do is we move our cursor to the bottom of where you see the column names. Click on that and just drag it down. And that'll freeze the top row. That means I can scroll and that top row is frozen. Now that's really important when it comes to sorting information. What I can also do is I can freeze a column by clicking over here, doing the same thing and moving it to the side. So I can move it all the way over here, and then I've frozen my sheet up until that point. So now when I scroll to the side, I see that part. Now, a Google form response will always give us this timestamp when the Google form was actually completed. So we'll see there's a whole bunch that were completed quite recently after I sent out that email. So these are all the ones that you completed, and these are a couple of dummy ones we completed earlier. But maybe I don't need to see that now. So I'm just going to get that out of the way. I'm going to click on that column, and I right click, and I just say hide column. So it'll still be there. Don't delete the timestamp column, because you might want to open up the form at a later stage again. And then what's going to happen is it's going to just throw it on at the end of your Google form. So you don't actually want to have that happen. So just keep that one there. Now, when I'm scrolling to the end, just a very good practice I've found. Google Sheets is a bit different than Google than Excel, in the sense that we want to limit the number of columns and rows that we have, because the whole thing loads quicker. Everything is just a smoother experience. So I always go, by default, it'll create one that runs, well, actually normally it runs up to Z, but this one runs up to O. But I like to just go and clear things out a little bit, go select, click on J, and then just click and hold and drag until the end. Select the ones you don't want, right click and delete. Remember, we can always add columns later if we need them. And then I'll do the same thing for rows. Click here at the bottom, scroll all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going to select all of them, and now I'm going to delete them. Right, now at this point, I'm going to pause for a second. Are there any questions? Anything that's uncertain? Because we've got our data set ready to go. We've frozen our panes. We've removed our extra columns. And our extra rows. So we are ready to start working with this data. So you can just ignore what I'm doing now. If you've got questions, please ask. I just need to change this quickly. Right, yes, that's exactly what I'm working on now, Gilbert. So what I'm gonna do in the chat, I'm gonna add a link here to the chat where you can go and make a copy of these responses. So this is not going to be linked to my Google form. But there's an interesting thing that's going to happen that I'll explain to you now. So you can click on that link and it'll copy everything that you see in front of you so that you've got your own Google Sheet to work with. And as I'm explaining the certain things that we need to do, you can add that information in on your end. So I'm going to give you a few minutes just to copy that, just to see that you can copy it. Now, while you are copying it, I see someone has joined my one now. Right, so here's the link. Right, so if you click on that, it should take you to something that looks like this. Would you like to make a copy of the response? So all you need to do is just click on the make a copy. Right, and then you've got your own copy that you can work with. Now, one of the interesting things that Google Sheets actually does when we make a copy is if there are any Google forms attached to that Google Sheet, it will make a copy of those forms as well. So if you go and look in your Google Drive, you will now see that you've also got your own form response training Google form. So you might want to delete that at a later stage, but you have a copy of everything on your end now as well. Okay, are we all still keeping pace? Can we go on? Right. Some of you that are now viewing this, it might be that you're not connecting with your Google account for some reason, because I see there's a few people that are viewing my document and not making a copy, but it's okay. Don't worry about that. We're going to go on and we're going to start looking at some of the important functions that we want to be able to do. So the first thing we want to do is we're just going to start with a basic sorting function. Remember, we can safely assume that this information has now been collected. All of it has been collected. So we can take this and we can start sorting it in a certain way. Now you want to sort in a number of different ways. So let's start off with a way that we often kind of sort things. I'm going to sort it according to my surnames. Now, when I do this, sorry, I went a bit too quickly there. When I sort according to this, what I can do, and the easiest way to sort according to a column, is at the top of a column, if we hover over the column, you'll see there's a little arrow there. If you click on that arrow, it gives you options that you can apply to the whole column. Now, I'm not going to get to the more complicated things yet. We just want to look at a basic sort function. If I say sort A to Z, what it does is it'll sort the entire sheet. So it's not only going to sort this one column, it'll sort everything around it as well. I say sort A to Z, and then you'll see everything has been sorted accordingly. There we've got Lukonye Bunge and then Salma Bobian. These are the first two learners that we've got alphabetically. But now we realize, but that's not what we want. We actually want to sort it according to grade. Now I click on that and I say sort sheet, and now I've got it sorted according to grade. But now it's not sorted according to well, Google Sheets, that might be a little bit clever here, but now it's not necessarily sorted according to surname. And then we want it sorted according to the name as well. So we're going to say sort according to name. And now the whole thing is a mess again. So how do we actually go about sorting it according to the different parts of this Google Sheet? Now, in order to do that, we need to select, again, the whole thing that we want to sort. A nice little trick to select everything. If I click here in that corner over there, that by default selects everything in my workbook. So now I've selected everything. Now I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to go to sort range, not sort sheet. I want to go sort range. Well, you can sort sheets, going to do the same thing, but we actually want to go to this advanced range sorting options, because what the advanced range sorting does is it gives me multiple sorts that I can apply. And here's a cool trick that I didn't even know about until earlier today. If I click on that first one that says data has header row, instead of having to go and sort according to these columns, I can now go and sort according to whatever is written in that header. So I want to say the first thing I would like to sort this list on is the grade. Then I'm going to add another column. I want to sort it then according to the section. And then we'll add another column. The next column that we want to look at is then the learner's surname. And then lastly, we want to look at the learner's name. So you can see the kind of detailed sorting that I get to do here. And now I can just click on sort. And here first I'm sorted according to grade. So all the grade 8As, then all the grade 8Bs, then all the grade 8s with no section at all. I'm just going to, for completeness sake, give them sections as well. And then here we've got all the grade 9As. And again, these are sorted alphabetically. So a very quick way of sorting these. Let's just quickly drag this down. Let me just change that so that we are complete. So you'll see immediately the headache that I have when I'm completing these things automatically now. If I send out my form without specific, where I allow them to kind of leave some of the questions open. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that I don't have to go and manually do that thing that I just had to do. But it's sorted. All that's a problem now is because I had to manually enter some of these things later, they might not be 100% correct. So this Johanna Boer, for example, should actually be above Abongile Suriname. So I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to move it there. And now our thing is sorted. You can obviously come back and sort it again at a later stage. But let's say we want to have our grade and section joined into one column. You might want to have the same thing with your learner's name and surname. If we have time, we'll get to that a little bit later as well. Now, please note, when we're working with a Google form, so there's something important that I forgot to show. Right here at the top, our header column. Now, it's fine when we get these short little questions in our Google Forms, but I think we've all seen Google Forms. Very often people write, what is the name of the learner? And then these can be quite lengthy, and it's difficult to see what is actually being written there. So in order to do that, we want to just add some wrapping, text wrapping here. So again, to do that, we click on this one, selects the whole row, and then we use the wrapping function, which that is over here that you'll see. So this tells my text how it should behave within a cell. So if I click on that, the default setting is always just overflow. So just disappear if there's no space for it anymore. I want to use the option of wrapping. So when I wrap it, suddenly there's my whole question. Now I can actually read the whole question. And it becomes easier. Otherwise, I don't know what information I'm working with. So now I've wrapped my question there. But let's say, for argument's sake, we want to add an extra column in here where we combine these two, because the classes are actually called 8A and 8B and 8C. So we would like to add that in here and not have these two standing separate. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert a column. So all that I do, wherever I want to insert the column, right click on the column at the top, say insert column right. And this I'm going to call the class column. And now I need to combine these two. In order to combine them, we're going to start using our first formula, and it's a very, very easy formula. Over here, you will see there's the formula bar. So I'm going to enter something into that formula bar. So you can either click here and start typing, or you can just simply click on the cell and start typing. Now, all formulas start with an equals. So that's how we're going to start our formula. Equals. And now to make life easier without you having to type, equals already tells Google Sheets that we want to enter a formula. So I'm going to enter my first formula by clicking on what I want to do. I want to take this one, and then I'm going to say and I want this one. And it's as simple as that. And now it's just slap the two together. Enter, and then it'll come up with a suggested autofill, where it'll tell you, do you want to do this for all rows? And, well, I do want to do this for all rows. So, yes, let's do it for all rows. And there we go. So now we've got a whole thing sorted according to class. And if I want to then, I don't need these two anymore, really. So I can just hide them. Right-click and hide columns. Makes my life a little bit easier. It's easier to navigate this whole thing. Again, I don't suggest deleting them because you might want to open up and activate the form again. Now, what happens when I activate the form and I've actually added columns into this thing? Don't worry, Google Forms is clever enough to know that it'll just continue writing the information into the correct one. So in other words, let's do it this way, just to give you an indication. So if I'm going to just fill these with purple, those are all the Google Form columns. And this class one, this is now my formula, the one that I've added in blue. Google Forms will just continue writing things next to this, and it'll just ignore this column. But what it will do, unfortunately, is it'll go and insert a row here at the bottom. And the formula that I have is not going to automatically copy to that row. So that's where it becomes a bit more tricky dealing with live data. So you can click and drag and click and drag and click and drag the whole time when new information comes in. But that's when we start looking at more advanced things to do in our Google Sheets Masterclass. Right. So here we've combined our class column, and we our data is starting to look a little bit like something that we can work with. Right. Are there any questions at this time? Are you all still keeping pace? Because now we're going to start getting to, I think, one of the most important things that we need to be able to do with this information, because this is still just a bunch of text. And for me, if you tell me, okay, now you need to tell me which, I want to know how many male learners there are in the class. So now I can go and I can say, okay, right. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And surely there must be an easier way to do this. So let's see how we can use the filter function now, which is really an absolutely vital function to be able to use. We're not going to use the formula. There's a filter formula, which is absolutely fantastic, but we're going to keep things reasonably simple. Maybe we'll get to the filter formula. I promise you, we've got enough things to keep you busy for well over an hour and a half, but I won't. I'll stop after an hour and a half, just so you can kind of start coming to terms with some of the things that we've done so far. So now we're going to get to the filter, which is this little icon over there. Seemingly insignificant little icon, but incredibly important and powerful. So in order to apply the filter, the easiest way to apply a filter is just click on this over here. So we'll go and we'll click on row one, and then we're going to click on the, let me just quickly remove these things. I just want to change this up a little bit. We're first going to click on this, which selects my headers. And then I'm going to click on that icon, not on the little arrow next to it yet. We'll do that later. What that does, if I click on that, you'll see immediately it creates these little triangles, my little filter icons, next to each and every heading. So that means I can start filtering information. Now, how filtering works is whatever you filter first. Let's start off with this learner gender thing that we said. So I'm going to go and I'm going to click here. Okay, let me just take that away then. The colors. Right, we'll just add the wrapping again. Okay, I hope you can see the triangle now, that little triangle, the green one that you see over there. Maybe we should use green to highlight it. So there's the little green triangles. Is that better, Gilbert? Okay, fantastic. Right, so these little green triangles over there, that is the filter icon. So we're going to start off with a simple filter. We want to just filter by gender because someone asked me now, so how many males are there? We're going to click here. We're going to say filter. And a good rule that I tend to use whenever I do these filters is I first click. I don't think it's going to allow me to do this now. No, it won't be. Okay, so a good idea that I do is I always first click clear. Because what clear does is now, if I click clear, it means I don't have anything selected. So my filter is going to come back with nothing at the moment. I only want to see the female learners in my list. So I'm going to click female. I'm going to say OK. And now I've got a list of the female learners. But be careful. Don't try and say, OK, I'm going to count there's 29 of them, because this is still referring to the row number. So you'll see it says 2, 3, 11, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22. So this is not how one counts. So clearly there can't be 29 of them. We can see that. Now an easy trick that I want to show you how you can just get to that. If that's the intention, then over here at the bottom, and you'll see now when I select things, it does a quick formula for you. So select all of those. Sorry, not at the explore. I pointed at the wrong thing. Over here, right? It does a quick little formula for you. So I've selected all of those, and it tells me there are 30. Right? So what I can, right, it just does a quick count for me. So yeah, it does basic little formulas for you depending on the information. Sometimes it'll give you a sum, sometimes it'll give you other things. Not sure why it is not playing along now. I think it might be that I'm zoomed in too much. I'm not going to go into that now, but there's a very quick way to just get that kind of number, that count function that you've got over there. So remember, we've only got one filter applied now. We've got this filter applied that tells us all the females in this list. And you can see there's a difference between the two. Note the difference between this little triangle and that triangle. The one that is filled in, that means that a filter is being applied in that column. The one over there means a filter is not being applied in the column. Now, how do I get back to a normal thing without filters? You can either click on this and say, okay, I'm just going to select all again and say, okay, and then you'll see it disappears because now it says no filters being applied. Or alternatively, you can just click on that one, which is like the master button. Click on that and it removes all filters, but it also takes away my little triangles, which is something I don't always want to do. My suggestion is usually to keep that filter on and just go and clear your selections if you see there are filters being applied. When we talk about the collaborative aspect of Google Sheets later, you'll understand why I say that. Right, so we're just going to click on this again. We're going to click on a little filter button, and now our filters come back. So now we can filter. So, Janine, I'm going to share the attendance register at the end of the session again. Right, so let's see here. Now I'm going to go and click on learner's gender. I'm going to go to, this time I only want to select the male. So again, I select clear, click male and say OK. But now I only want to have a look at the grade 9 males in this class. So I'm going to apply a secondary filter. So now I can click on class. And here I want to say, I'm looking for the grade 9 learners. Now this is a bit of a problem because I can't just select grade 9. I've got multiple options here. So now I need to say clear and go and select grade 9A, 9B, 9C, and I say OK, and that'll filter the grade 9 learners. Now in this case, I've only got 3 because this is a pretty small data set. Now I'm going to see if you've been paying attention. Can anyone think of a different way other than having to select? All right, I'm just going to select all of them. What is a different way that I could select the grade 9s? Only the grade 9s. Or maybe we should show you one more filter, and then you can tell me 2 different ways. So keep that in the back of your head. I want to show you one more very useful way of what we can do with filters, because I think this is really going to open up what we want to be able to do with filters. So we've been ignoring this column, which is a problematic column, because this is the column that we gave the people completing our form. We gave them multiple options. So we used tick boxes instead of radial boxes, but we use them because for a very specific reason. Now, let's say I want to now filter out all those doing athletics. So let's just first do all the boys in the school, the males in the school that do athletics. I'm going to click on my filter button, and now I'm going to see, but wait, here's a problem. If I select athletics, I'm going to select only athletics. What happens is there's only one chap that does athletics, but that's impossible because if I select everything, I'll see, but hang on, there's one that does athletics, but they do athletics and chess, athletics and choir, athletics and cricket. So that's not working for me. How can I select only the athletics? Well, then we're going to have to explore a little bit further in our filter functions. So we're done with it. We're going to, with this filter by values, everything has to be selected. Leave this one and select all. Click on the arrow to close it. Now we're going to have this filter by condition. I'm just going to look at a basic option here, but just to give you a sense of what you could do with filter by condition. There's basic stuff here at the top. Is empty, is not empty. So here we can immediately go and select all those cells or the responses where the people might have left something out. In this instance, this column, remember we said this one we're probably not going to make compulsory. So here I can quickly find a list of learners who are not participating in anything by going to that. Then we've got the text options. So text contains, text does not contain, text starts with, ends with, is exactly. Date. So if there are dates, we can go and filter by dates. Is it before a certain date, after a certain date? If there are numbers, here are your basic number operatives, greater than, less than, etc. So here you can really get detailed, and there's always this option at the bottom, custom formula is, but I'm not going to go into that now because there we can go and get very crazy and tricky with the filters that we apply. But we want to just look at this text contains, because the reason when we do this and we say text contains and we type in athletics, what it's going to do is it's going to find all of them that have athletics as an option somewhere. So there we've got all these with athletics. We can do the same thing. We're going to say rugby. Right, so there's all those learners have selected rugby. When you want to filter for multiple ones, it becomes a lot more complicated. So we're not going to go into that yet, but you can do that as well. But I always say the same thing. If you start exploring this thing and start really understanding it, one of the great things that will happen is you will also start understanding, what do I need to Google in order to find this answer and the response. So when we get to that, remember there's this part that says text contains. It tells me I can use a value or a formula. So you're going to end up using a formula to do that bit where you want it to contain multiple sports. But that gets too complicated. We're not going to look at that today. Right. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Now, all right. Are there questions with the filters? Do you understand the filtering? Because the filtering is one of the most important parts of kind of coming to terms with the information. I've often thought. One thing I want to show you, if you are looking for, this is a specific list that you wanted to get. Once you've got this list, if this is an important list that you need to keep, you can copy this, right? We select all of them, we copy it, and we'll create a new sheet. And then when you paste it, you right click and you just say paste special values only. If I do that, it'll give me that list, only that list. It will include the hidden columns as well, and if there might have been hidden rows, it'll include that. But what it won't do is it won't include the filtered rows. So it'll give you only that chunk of information, right? So if you need to extract it, that's a way that you can go and extract that information if you need to come back to it at a later stage. If, for example, you've got a list similar to this one, and we're going to just filter this out. We want to have choir. So there's choir. We're going to say, but we want both. And we're going to say grade. We want to see the grade 8s. Right, so if for example, you want to now generate a list, these are the grade 8s who do choir. There you've got it. Now you can quickly take that and you can quickly send it off to the choir coordinator, and then you've got your information, the information that you wanted to generate. There was a question that I asked that I said, how can you filter this column where I've got my classes in a different way that or not this column, but how can I filter this data set in a different way that I select only the grade 9s or only the grade 8s without having to go and tick all of them? Does anyone have any idea? There are two different ways that you can go about doing it. So let's take this out quickly. So I'm just taking away all the filters. Does anyone want to take a stab at it? So when I'm filtering this, there are two ways that I can find grade 8s and grade 9s. Well, there are three ways. The one way that I pointed out, I'm going to give the answer away now. So going once, going twice. Does no one want to have a go? All right. Yes, but we're not going. We could do that potentially now, but there's a much easier way than using a find function. But yes, that would also work. But here we go. If we get to this point, remember we've got all of them selected, and here just by filter by conditions, we can just simply say text contains 9, and that'll also give us all the grade 9s. This is specifically, I suppose the easiest would be just to tick them off because there's only 3 classes, but that would also work. Alternatively, what you could do is you could apply, you could apply a filter to your grade column, which is hidden here as well. Right, so let's just quickly add our filter again. Now remember, ultimately, one of the great things of Google Sheets the biggest advantage of Google Sheets really is the fact that it is online. It is online so that it can be used and viewed and manipulated by multiple people, which is a fantastic aspect of it. But if we had multiple people on here, now I hope, I'm just going to, Gilbert, are you still there? I don't know if he's already left, maybe. Okay, no, it's fine. I'm trying to put him on the spot. But if I had multiple people accessing this form, if you are on this form and I applied right, Gilbert, can I send this to you quickly and you join this and you start applying filters and you make it difficult for all of us? So I'm just going to share this with my colleague quickly. Right, and he's been giving editor rights. So let's say what's going to happen is he opens this up, and I promise you I won't keep you busy for more than 5 minutes. And he also wants to start applying filters, but he does that while I'm looking at it. I hope he's going to, sorry for putting you on the spot now, Gilbert. But he's going to apply filters while I'm looking at it. Unfortunately, those filters are going to be applied for me as well. Right, so there's Gilbert. He's in. I can see he's doing stuff. I'm trying to look at certain things, and he's going to come and apply a filter that's going to mess it up for me. All right, I was busy reading the information, and there he goes, and he messes it up for me, which is then frustrating because now I go and say, no, I want to get all of these in here, and now I'm messing it up for him again, which becomes frustrating. So there he is. I can see he's busy with the class thing. And again, I was not looking at those classes, and he's messed it up for me. Right. Thanks, Gilbert. Now you can stop. He's not going to stop. Right. I'm just going to take away his rights. Absolutely. Right. So there he's out. Thank you. Now you can imagine that if we're multiple people working on this, that can be very frustrating. So because of that, there's a different option here right next to it that you will see that little arrow over there, which is my filter views. So if I click on this little arrow, you'll see I've got the option of saying create new filter view. Now what this does is immediately you'll see this gray block around it. Now what the gray block means is I am the only one seeing this. The filters that I'm applying will not affect other people who are in my Google Sheet at the moment. So that is already very useful. So we could now be multiple people in this, applying filters, however we want to apply them, without affecting the information for someone else. But it goes beyond that, because again, we have to understand some teachers, and I'm hoping that many of you that are in here have already kind of started playing around with some of the nicer stuff that you could start doing with technology. So you might also have come across that the fact that some teachers are immediately scared of this kind of stuff. And if I'm going to start telling them, you need to click on this little button and you need to go to that kind of thing and then type stuff in, you've lost them. But the nice thing about these filter views is I can now create a filter view that others can use and apply. So if I want to create one here that I'm going to say, right, so here we want to have the text contains choir. Right, so that's my filter view that I'm going to have over there, and I'm going to call this one choir. Right, and when I'm done, I just close it. Anyone else who goes and opens up the sheet, if they click on this filter views, they'll see there's the choir one. They can click on this and it'll show them all the choir learners. And from there, they can still go and apply more filters if they wanted to. Remember, if they're going to apply more filters, so let's apply this one quickly. And we say male. So now we've only got the male choir learners. If I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go back here and I'm going to open up the choir thing again, whatever settings were applied gets saved. So I can't save it and say, now you are frozen in time. We can make copies and we can do things like that. If I now want to say, but I want to duplicate this one, I want to have a choir boys and a choir girls. But just remember, your list of filter views can get very, very, very long eventually. if you're going to create millions and millions of these little filter views. But what's nice about that is if you are the more tech savvy one, you can actually go and set up these filters for your colleagues. And you just need to tell them that, look, there's a little button over there. In your case, if you understand what happens over there, that's great. That's the live one. But remember, there's that little arrow next to it over there. The arrow next to it is the one where you can create pre-made filter views. And that's especially when we start getting more complicated with how we set up the filters. If it's a longer data set and there's more things and there's multiple columns and you don't want to go and punch all of that information in or go and set up that filter every time, just save it for yourself and create a filter view rather. Right. Are there any questions about the filter view? Are there questions about the filters in general? Because we're going to step off of filters now. Happy? All right. So let's close our filter view. And there we have our Google Sheet ready to go. Now, what I can tell you in terms of our use in our district, many of our Google Sheets kind of have this by default on the filter thing, so that it allows us to quickly jump to any filter that we need to apply. So we tend to just leave it on the filters in the heading row. But you don't need to. If you don't want to leave them on, you're welcome to turn them off as well. What I want to show you now, I think, is another very, very cool little trick that you can, or something that I think we use this to death in our district as well. And that is when we start using checkboxes and the conditional formatting that goes with checkboxes. So let's say, for argument's sake, in this instance, what we've got here, we've got this Google form that we sent out to our parents for whatever reason it might be. But one of the questions here at the end is, would you like to make an appointment with the teacher? And I think it's important that if we're going to send out a form, and you have to understand that if you send out a form with questions like that, parents expect responses. If they've said, yes, I would like an appointment with the teacher, they don't want that to just simply be ignored. But if we're going to send this out and you've got 1,000 learners in your school, it might become a little bit tricky to manage. So how do you know who has made an appointment? When have you made appointments, etc., etc.? So what we want to do is we're going to latch another column onto this thing. I'm going to say insert column to the right. And I'm just going to say here, appointment scheduled. Right. So appointment scheduled. Now, again, when it comes to data and data integrity, we don't want to just leave this open to whatever anyone wants to write in here, because now you need to start imagining this is something I could potentially then say, I'm going to share this with all the teachers in the school, and we're going to go through a workshop that everyone understands how to create little filters. And then here, when we get to grade 8A, if you open this up and you're grade 8A's teacher, you go and say, I want to see the 8A class. And now I'm going to respond to these ones that have said yes, and I'm going to schedule the appointments as necessary. And we're just using an example now. I know it's not really how it's going to work, but just as an example. But now what happens is you've got one teacher that says yes, another one that gives the date, another one that says will call. And this all becomes a bit of a mess to deal with in terms of data, because it's all different. We can't just leave it open for them to write whatever they want to write. So I'm going to show you two things that you can do here. The first one is how we add a checkbox, and the second one is how we add a little drop down that we could potentially select information. So the first one is appointment scheduled. And here, in order to insert a checkbox, we just simply click on insert and we say checkbox. And once I've inserted my checkbox, I can now either go and click and drag this thing to the bottom, or when you get this little blue square there in the corner, just double click on that and it'll automatically create checkboxes for you almost until the end. So how this works, this double click thing, I see there's a little problem there, is it'll run this and create them up until where it finds there's a blank space next to it, and then it'll stop. In this instance, there's one person that didn't respond. I'm just going to respond for them and say yes, and we'll just drag those blocks to the bottom. So now instead of writing whatever they want to write, they actually just click on a box, which I promise you in terms of getting information in when you are sending it out to people and expecting them to respond. What we found is this works a lot better to get people to respond when they do this for us, instead of having to go and type things. If they can tick on something, people are okay with that. It's easy to do. So let's say we've got an appointment scheduled, and then next to that, I'm going to have another one that I'm going to say, let's just remove these tick boxes. And here we're going to say something like could not schedule. Right, so in other words, they were contacted, but they for some reason could not schedule it. But now again, we want to give little options. So in order to do that, we're going to right click. Let's see if I can do this in another space rather. Right, so this would work if you right click as well, but there's a little bit, you're not going to be able to read what I'm doing over here. So I'm going to do it at another spot as well. That also works. But if you wanted to right click, you go right to the bottom, view more options, and it's called data validation. If you can't find it over there, you just go to data and data validation. Now, what this data validation does is we've got a number of options, but we're just going to look at the simplest of these options. So when we get to criteria, there are two ways that you normally use this. You either go and find a range in the sheet so they can select something from there, or we just use a list of items. And you just give options separated by a comma. So did not respond, no time available. What could be another reason? No transport to school. Right, so yes, those are just some options, just some random options I've given. So now, again, we've got the same setup, just double click here, and now you'll see there's a little drop box in all of them. So I've got the option when I'm completing this, I can click appointment scheduled, and then I could go and respond in whatever way, if it could not be scheduled. So in other words, if there's, would you like to make an appointment? Yes, and the appointment is not scheduled, then they need to respond and say something over here. So did not respond, whatever the case might be. So I tried to contact them, but they did not contact me. So now I can know these ones that are blank, or I can just kind of ignore. But I'm a big fan. There's one big problem for me still happening over here. So it's great that the teachers can kind of do these things, but really it's getting hard to read just a bunch of rows. So I'm a really big believer of color coding things and making sure that things are easier to read because of the color coding that we can do. So now we're going to go and have a look at conditional formatting. Is everyone happy with the checkboxes? Are there questions regarding the checkboxes and the data validation? Right, I see Anel says thumbs up. Are the rest of you still with me? Still keeping up? I know we're going through a lot of stuff. Lots of different little techniques and skills, but remember, right, so there is a hand up. Oh, is that just an acknowledgement of I'm with you? Thanks, Inga. I see you put it down again. All right, so now we want to start coloring in our thing. Now, I've seen lots of people do this and they say, all right, so this one is important. I'm just going to go to, we're going to just kind of make this red. And yes, this one needs to be red. And this one needs to be red. But surely there must be a better way of doing that, because it's okay. I've only got 30. I can deal with that. But if I've got 1,000, just imagine how long that's going to take. So we want to start with conditional formatting. But before we get to these yeses and nos, I want to show you just another kind of entry into conditional formatting to keep things a little bit simpler initially. So let's say, for argument's sake, we want to go and take this column, the male and female column, and we just want to go and highlight the females, the female selections in pink and the male in blue. I know this is very, it's very gender stereotypical, but for the purposes of this training, we're going to do it that way. So once I've clicked on it, I go to Format, and I go to Conditional Formatting. Now, there's lots of cool things that you can do in conditional formatting, and you can keep yourself busy for a long time. But we're just going to look at the simpler stuff and then give you the option to explore the more complicated things on your own. So the simplest one that we have over here is, and you'll notice there's a kind of familiarity between this and the filter stuff, in that you've got the same things here that you start with. Is empty, text contains, does not contain, starts with, ends with, blah, 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 all those things. And here we've got date is, and here we've got the greater than, less than, all of those things. And then this thing at the bottom, custom formula, which we will be using this time, but not yet. So now we want to go and filter this. We want to apply some format here that applies across the board. So let's say text contains, like we did with the other one. Now text contains, I've deliberately chosen this, and we're going to say male. So if it's male, it needs to be blue. But there's a problem with our formula. Why is it highlighting everything in blue? Anyone tell me? Maybe we should just open up everyone's mics. Why do you think everything is being highlighted in blue and not just the male columns? Right. Yep. You're 100% correct. Female has the word male in it, unfortunately, so that's not going to work. So we want to have not text contains, text is exactly. And that'll give me highlight all the male ones in blue. Another way you could potentially have done it is text starts with. I'm usually quite lazy, so I often do it this way around. Text starts with M, so I know all the males will start with M, and there we've got this as well. And then we're going to say done. We're going to say take the same one. We're going to add another rule, and we want this time text starts with, or text is exactly, whichever one you want to use, F, and those are going to be highlighted in pink. So there I've got a little quick conditional formatting happening there. This is okay, but we're not quite where we want to be with this whole thing yet. So now we're going to get to these rows that become a little bit more important for us. So I want to apply conditional formatting on these ones. Would you like to make an appointment with the teacher? I'm going to select them, and I'm going to say format, conditional formatting. Now, we could do the same thing we did with the other one. If yes, then highlight it in green or highlight in red or whatever, but we're going to get fancy with this. Because I think this is one of my favorite tricks in Google Sheets, is being able to do this. So instead of using any of these, we're going to scroll right to the bottom, and we're going to say custom formula is. Now, when we get here, we want to start applying a formula, and all formulas have to start with an equals sign. So we're going to say equals. So in other words, if this equals yes, or sorry, not if this equals, if our first cell, J2, which is this one, right, so if J2, I don't know what happened there for a second, if J2 equals yes, then you're going to then you need to change all of them to green. Or in this instance, what we want to do is we want to make it stand out nice and bold. We're going to make it red, and we're going to change it, the white in the red. So then we see, okay, if it is yes, then we want to do that. But we don't want to just color in the yeses. We want to color in the whole row, because suddenly it becomes a lot easier. So what if we expanded our range to not apply to J, only this column, but we're going to see what happens if we apply it all the way to the front to A, and see if this is going to do anything for us. And we want to apply it all the way to the end. And let's see what happens when we do that. Not what we wanted. It looks like nothing actually happened. So something is clearly not working. But if we unhide it, we see something is actually working. We've applied the formatting to the first column, but not the whole column. So we're almost there. Now, how do we get it to apply across? Now, the next thing, I can explain it in detail to you, or I can just give you the solution here. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just to give you a quick understanding of why it works this way, we are going to use absolute an absolute value. Now, in Google Sheets and in Excel, an absolute value is defined by using the $sign. What that means is you're not going to move that part of the formula around. So effectively, why this first one is red is because my formula is telling me you need to start coloring in. If you see that J2, in this instance, if you see that J2 is yes, then you need to start coloring in, but you're going to start from A2. So then you only color in the first column. But if I fix the column, so in other words, apply the $sign to the, not the hash sign, the $sign to the column, suddenly it's going to color in the whole thing. Right, so can you see now suddenly I've got red rows everywhere where it says it's a whole row. So in other words, all of these highlighted in red, now I know these are the ones I need to respond to. So would you like to make an appointment with the teacher? Yes, they are red. If I open it up as a staff member, my eyes are drawn to the red lines immediately. Now we need to fix these red lines. We'll be getting to that in a minute. So over here, there's something funny that's happening. Remember, we had a conditional formatting over here. Now, why on earth are these not being colored in red? Now, the way that conditional formatting works is you can apply multiple layers of conditional formatting on top of each other. But because these are the ones we defined first, you'll see now we've got over here, this is the first one, this is the second one, and this is the third one. So it'll first go and check if this is true. And if this is true, that's the formatting it will apply. Then it'll check if this one is true. And if that's true, that's the formatting. And then last one it'll check is this one. So unfortunately for us at the moment, it's first going to apply the other ones and then the red one. So what you can do over here is we can remove this red one. In order to move it, you'll see there are 3 little dots, 4 little dots. They're pretty tricky to see, but it's right here on the side of the thing. And there, if I click on that, I drag it to the top. And now you'll see now it is becoming, now it's the priority. So now this one is number 1, this is number 2, and this is number 3. So it will first apply my red line. Now what I want to do now is I want to say, but I'm going to turn these red lines into green lines once they've actually been ticked. So in order to do that, what we do is we're going to apply another conditional formatting. So we're going to say add another rule. Let's just take that away. We want to apply it again to the whole thing from A2 all the way to the end. Double dot L. Right. So in other words, A2 to L, your now the name's just escaping me. Ellipse. The ellipse. Is it the ellipse? No, it's not the ellipse. But anyway, you get what I mean. Here to the end from A2 all the way to the end. That's the range I'm going to apply to. And I'm going to go to this format cells. I'm going to go down to the custom formula again. And this time I'm going to say equals. We're going to look at this row now at K. So this time we're going to say equals K2. If K2 and these little ticks, if it is empty, it is false. And if it is selected, it is true. That's how it works. So now we can say if K2 equals true, then we're going to go and we're going to color in our whole row green. And we're going to go and add, we're going to make it a white on green text. Colon. Thank you, Delise. It just escaped me now. And all I want to add still here is I just need to add my little $sign. And you'll see now, if I start clicking on things, again, nothing is happening. Before I go on, can anyone tell me why you think nothing is happening at this point in time? Why is the red not changing into green as I told it to change? Any ideas? Nope, the done is not going to make a difference because if I click there, it'll be green. So that's one of the cool things. Thanks for pointing that out, Delise. One of the nice things about when you're doing this, it is applying the formula real time. So you can constantly fiddle with this because these can get very complicated. I promise you, I've done some very weird ones with the formatting rules. So it shows you live whether or not what you're doing is correct. So for example, if I take this little $ out, immediately I'll see, wait, something is not right. It's not coloring in the correct thing. My issue that I have now at the moment is I need to sort out my order, because now the red, remember, this one is going to be applied first and this one second. And this one is still true because this person has still said yes. But if I now move this green one over the red one, suddenly when I tick these little boxes, my red lines turn into green lines. And I could go and I could do the same kind of thing over here in the last one, where I say could not schedule. I'm going to let me apply the same thing. I'm just going to do this one very quickly. A2 to L2. We're going to say custom formula equals. Right. So what happens now is if they actually fill something in, it highlights it in purple. Ooh, that's a terrible purple. Let's just use a lighter one. Right. So in other words, now if they did not respond, at least I can see there's a reason why they are not responding. So effectively, I'm creating this little checkbox system here at the end that allows me to deal with a masses of information. Now, it could be only one person, it could be lots of people. I know in our district with our intern, we often set up little systems where she just ticks the boxes and you can see when she's done which things, and we draw up multiple boxes and she can tick the different boxes and it highlights it in multiple colors. It just makes it easier to deal with this information, a lot easier to deal with it. So just very quickly to explain what I did over here, because I just did it without explaining anything. That way of writing it over there, I'm going to try and write it over here for you. That's a little bit bigger. When I use this kind of annotation, so in other words, when you use the greater than, less than, or the less than, greater than, and double quotation marks, that means if it is not empty. So in other words, what I've said, if this column is not empty, then you highlight it in purple. And again, I can take this and I can decide this is going to be right at the top, or let's put it over there. So in other words, this person might have, right, so would you like to make an appointment? Yes, they did not respond. So I'm just going to say did not respond. Oh, sorry, now I deleted the whole thing. But anyway, I think you get the idea what I'm referring to. Right, so if we want to start determining the amount of scheduled appointments, okay, we are slowly but surely getting into the slightly more complicated side of things. One way that you could do it, I suppose the easiest way that you could do it, if an educator goes on here and they've got, for example, the 8A class, right? Then they take this, they filter it. I only want to see the 8A learners. And then I'm going to go here and I only want to go and filter the, okay, I didn't expand the filter to this. Let me just quickly go and switch off the filter. Right, so I filtered. Let's just go through that step again. We're going to go through the 8A class. And we're going to go over here, appointment scheduled, and we're just going to select the true ones. So now what's happened is this information that's showing over here is the 8A learners that have scheduled appointments. That would be one way of doing it. Now, multiple ways that you can go about doing this, and we're kind of getting to that next. Another trick that I want to show you that we could potentially start working with as well with this. What I do want to show you quickly, because I think, Lionel, what you're also referring to is that now we start looking at formulas like count and count if, and if we have time, I think we're going to actually get around to it. If everyone's still happy with what we're doing at the moment, if you are happy with the pace that we are moving at, we can get to that step as well. Becomes a little bit more complicated, so we're going to have to see if we can get there. But what we also want to do with this now, one of the most I don't want to say one of the most dangerous things, but really one of the things that can cause chaos and havoc is giving people just free, open access to everything. So I always, with Google Sheets, those of you who've worked with any of the systems that we've developed over the past 2 years will know that there are parts of the Google Sheet that you can't access, and then there are parts that you can access. Some of you might be working with a Scuba platform, and then you'll know there's lots of parts on that that are blocked, that we don't necessarily allow you to access, depending on where you're supposed to make edits. But if I look at this thing, actually, the only part that I want my teachers to be able to edit is here at the end. Remember, they can apply filters. Filters are not editing things. Filters are only applying views to certain things. So they only need access and editing rights to be able to apply filters to things. So if we only want them to edit certain things, what we can do is we can apply sheet protections as well. So we can select these, we can go here, and we can say protect sheet. And here what we're going to do is we're going to say, I want this whole sheet to be protected. In other words, only I can edit it, except for these last 2 columns. So I can drag the range if I wanted it to be all of those. If I realize that I want to allow the teachers to change the yeses to nos as well, I can say I'm only going to allow them to edit that range. And I'm going to say OK, and I'll say set permission. And that means once I've set this permission, remember I shared this with Gilbert. I don't want him to have access to the rest of the sheet. What this says, by the way, just so that you understand this part as well, this means when I say select who can edit, that refers to who can edit the rest of the sheet, everything else. If I say done now, and I share this Google Sheet with my educators, with the teachers in my school, with editing rights. And that's important. You have to share the sheet with them with editing rights. Because I've got this little lock applied over there, you'll see that means there's protections. These editing rights that I've got over here, that will overwrite the sharing rights that the sheet as a whole has. So in other words, to explain it in a different way, you can share this now with your educators. They need to have editing rights on this sheet, but on top of those editing rights, I'm going to say, yes, you can edit these sheets, but only columns K and L. You can only access these 2. If you want to get really, really kind of granular with this whole thing, now let's just quickly take this away. I'm going to go and delete this. Right? What you can do if you really want to get into a lot of detail is you can say, I'm going to select grade 8A. I'm going to go to protect sheet. I'm going to say range. This range is protected except for Gilbert can edit it. Only the 2 of us can edit it. And we're going to say other people can't edit it. So what you could do potentially is you can say that only the teacher from the 8A class can edit these rows. Only the teacher from the 8B class can edit these rows. But that becomes a lot more advanced in terms of protections and managing protections. Just to kind of open up your ideas to what you could potentially do with this. Are there more questions about the protections? Otherwise, we can go to Lionel's question to give him a very quick. I wonder if I shouldn't rather make a little video on that, because that is going to take a little bit longer. There's one more function that I would like to share with you to just get your ideas going in terms of what you could do with this whole thing going forward. And then I'll do a very quick demo of explaining what Lionel is referring to. Hopefully I'm going to get it right. We'll see. So what I want to do is this is now my master sheet. I'm going to call this my data set, whatever I want to call it. So this is going to be where all of the information is actually located. But I could potentially split this into multiple sheets. So here I remember I made the sheet 2, which was a copy and a paste of everything here, but we don't want to copy and paste things. Right, the protected ranges, just to show that again. So there are 2 ways that you can get to protected ranges. You can either select, or well, you can either be anywhere here and then you can use this little drop down button there, data set, or next to the sheet, and then you'll see protect sheet. Okay, so what that'll do is it will open up a little protect thing that kind of gives you default settings. From there, you can either go and set up your protections, or you can have a look. If you say cancel, it'll show you what has already been set up. Another way that also works well is if you go to, where is that again? Now I've forgotten. Oh, sorry, yes, it is data. So if you go on data, you'll see there's a button, protect sheets and ranges. If you click on that, it opens up this protected sheet and ranges pane here on the side. So this will open up this thing. So I always go through this route to give you an idea of what I tend to use. So I always go data, protect sheets and ranges, because then that doesn't by default set up something. It shows me what protections have already been created, and it allows me to add more if I needed to add more. And it allows me to edit the ones that have been set up already. Right, so to give you an idea how I actually use this in my class when I was still a teacher, because I use these quite a lot, is my learners had to book time slots for them to, they had to book certain slots when they wanted to do their orals, as an example. And I would chunk them into groups of 5 or 6 learners. Those 5 or 6 learners know that they are coming on the Wednesday after school. Now, this is for my matric learners. They would do their orals on Wednesdays after school, and it's a first come, first serve. If you go in there, you need to go and find where your group is, and you need to go use a little drop down, which I created to book your time slot, what time you're going to be coming. So I use that sometimes. I had other systems devised on Google Sheets. I use that a lot with my learners to kind of get them to book time slots, get them to do certain things. But we were fortunate; we were a Google school, so our learners all had Google accounts, and I knew what those Google accounts were, so I could set up protections in that way for them. But that's a kind of trick that I use in my classroom to give you an idea. Protected ranges are really important, because if you don't protect ranges, people just go in and delete formulas and do things that you don't want them to do. But anyway, so let's have a look at if we wanted to create this with a formula instead of having to go and copy and paste things manually. Now, we've got this option here of going add sheet, and I'm going to create a filter function here. So this is now using a formula to filter. So filter. And how the filter function works is actually pretty straightforward. We're going to say equals filter, and I'm going to go quite quickly because our time is basically finished. I'm going to say equals filter, and you'll see what it tells me now is first I need to select a range, and then I need to select a condition. And I've got the option to select multiple conditions. So I can select a lot of conditions if I wanted to. So essentially, I'm going to do this filter thing the same way that the same way that I did the filter using these little buttons, only I'm going to use a formula to do it this time around. So here I've got the filter selected. I'm going to say the range that I want to filter. I only want to filter this first little bit, right? Actually, let's say we just want to filter this part, just the learner's name and the surname. Or maybe let's filter that part. We're just going to filter learner's name, learner's surname. That's the part of the information that I want. But I'm going to filter it based on the class that they're in. And I'm going to say equals grade 8A. And let's see what it gives us. Right, so there it gives me the names of the learners in 8A and their gender. Right, so yes, the attendance register for those of you who might need to get going pretty soon. I just want to copy and paste it for you quickly. I realize we are getting very close to our time now, so there's a link to the attendance register in the chat. So what I could do now potentially, and this is kind of just extend your thoughts into what one could do with this. Now remember this filter, I'm only doing rows B to D. What if I wanted another row? I could potentially go and copy this. And I'm just going to go to over here. I'm going to add it. I don't want that. This time around, I would like to take column G, I think it is. No, it's not column G. Column it is. Let's see, we're looking at column I. That's the one that I want, right? So I'm going to say column I, and then it filters out that one for me. But instead of having to manually type the classroom there, what if I went and I created, using this right click, more actions, data validation, and now I'm going to use this list from range. I'm not going to use a list of items. I use list from range. I click on that. Sorry, let me do that a little bit slower. That little button over there allows me to go and select the range. Now I don't need to go and type it in because that can be a bit, now I need to make sure, is it J, is it K, wherever it might be, I don't know. So I'm just going to use the select from range button, and I want to have the classes, but from row 2, not from the first row. So that means if I say save, you'll see what I do. What I've done is I've created a little drop down, 8A, all of those. And then potentially what I could do is I can now say from that point onwards, these, instead of being a predefined thing, I'm going to say G has to equal that B1, right? At the moment, it's going to look like it's broken. And this one is also going to go and equal B1. And now what I do is I just select a class, and suddenly I've created my own little manual filter that I've added into this thing. Now, to add to what Lionel was referring to, I could go and extend. I can decide which columns I want to drag in. Now, at this point in time, what I'm doing is I'm using two filters. You'll see there's one filter and there's another filter because I'm breaking up this data set. There's one B to D and there's one over here, I. If you are very confused at this point in time, then just kindly ignore what I'm telling you, what I'm saying next, because this is going to get a little bit more confusing. You could use, actually, I'm going to stop there before I confuse you too much, but let me show you how that part would technically work. I don't know if it's going to play along with me now. And it does. Right, so we could potentially do this as well. So what that would do is I'm actually using these curly brackets, means I'm going to create my own little list. So now I'm splitting it up like that. So I'm taking column B, C, and D, comma, and then I want to take column I as well. But now we're getting a bit too complicated with how this thing works. It is actually 4:30, so we are done with this. What I will do, because I had that question from Lionel about the educators and the counts and things like that, because I think it's a very important way to extend what we're doing here as well, is being able to use counts and essentially having an extra little tab that we use as for totals as an example, which is quite a useful thing to do. So those of you who want to stick around, I think I might as well go on. It's going to take another 10 minutes or so. I'm going to explain the count and the COUNTIF and the COUNTIFs function. It will be part of the recording that I'll send you tomorrow anyway. So if you have to get going, you are more than welcome to leave. But those of you who are interested in knowing how that works, I'm going to add it to this recording at the end of this recording. So if you have to leave, you can leave. If you want to stick around, you can stick around. Yes, I will. I always send a video to at the end of our recording. I wonder if we shouldn't rather stop, because I think we are getting to that whole point where the cup is overflowing already. What I'd want to show you very quickly, those of you that are still in the session, I see a number of you have left already. Last thing I want to show you, if this kind of thing tickles you and this kind of thing intrigues you, then please go have a look at our at the e-learning site. If we go to the e-learning site, our Cape Winelands e-learning site, and I'll include this in the email that I'll send you tomorrow, there is a course on data analytics over here. And with this course in data analytics, there are 4 different sessions that we had. So the real masterclass, the masterclass session 1 is over here. There's a video on that. There's masterclass part 2, and then there's Google Data Studio follow-up. These 3 sessions go hand in hand, and it's about this kind of stuff that we're doing now. And it kind of gives you good ideas of how you can get to a couple of cool little things that you want to do. Over here, we've also got a Google cheat sheet. So there I've got little shorter videos that you can have a look at regarding a number of different formulas that you can use. So you can have a look at that as well. If you don't have time for a long hour and a half workshop and you just want like a 5-minute video on multiple form responses to one sheet, how do I control the input in the Google form, cell referencing, how does that work? Some more advanced stuff, conditional formatting, we did do that, the same stuff that we did now. So there's this as well. I'll share a link to this page and you can look into what you can find on this page as well, if this kind of thing tickles you and you're intrigued by it. And of course, if you are building your own little thing and you get stuck at some point, that's what we are for. You're welcome to send me an email. I really enjoy playing around in Google Sheets. I'm more than happy to help you fix things if you get stuck and you start playing around with what you can do. With that said, I'll promise if I get time tomorrow, I'll make a short video on the COUNTIF and the count functions, how you would be able to use that on this data set in order to create exactly that what Lionel is referring to. And with that said, I'm going to stop the recording now. If there are any more questions, please, you're welcome to ask those questions. We are over our time.